Welcome back to the Perfect Lap Podcast. I'm Mark Jager. This is Mark Kilgore. He goes by Kilgore. I go by Jager. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of things. A lot of things in Time Attack have been going on. So we got GridLife at Lime Rock Park, Global Time Attack at the Ridge, and World Time Attack Challenge, of course, at Sydney Motorsports Park. All right, Kilgore. So let's start it off. We're going to talk about GridLife. So you watched the entire broadcast from start to finish, and you got a little bit of insights from the drivers. So give me a little bit of shakedown. What kind of happened? What are some of the interesting things that happened at GridLife?
Yeah, it was a good event. Obviously, they did the live stream. It was a festival event there at Lime Rock Park, which, Lime Rock Park is such an interesting track for Time Attack itself. It's a very short lap. You're generally, the fastest cars are in the mid to low 50-second laps. It's a fairly short track. I think it's something like 1 point something miles. Like, I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head, but it's hard to get a lot of cars on track, which I think makes it especially difficult because you have to manage traffic. And, normally that is something that we deal with anyways, but I think that it is only amplified at a small track like Lime Rock Park. So it makes it even more difficult to get that perfect lap in. You've really got to time it well. I know you love to talk about the strategy of Time Attack. You have to have your strategy down to a T to make sure that you get that perfect lap in. So I think that's something, that we can kind of talk about here. The different strategies that go on. There's things, with like warming up your tires, warming up your car. You've only got, maybe a minute to a minute and a half on even a warm-up lap, right? So you've got to get everything up to temperature quickly on your first lap. So, that was something that I found pretty interesting as I was watching. A lot of records were set, so we'll kind of run through those. We'll kind of run through the new records that were set. So it's the third year that Lime Rock Park, or that GridLife has been at Lime Rock Park. So a lot of records were set. The overall record was reset by Sasha Anise and a 370Z.
370Z, yeah.
Yep, 370Z with a VQ engine, hybrid powertrain, which is pretty cool.
It's an awesome car. I can't wait to literally one of these days we'll dive deep into this car, and hopefully we'll get him on the show and he can give us like the ins and outs. Obviously, probably like many, I've dove a little bit into it, but that car is simply an amazing and awesome Time Attack car. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it is super cool. And the thing I like about it is that, right, like, it's very sleek. It doesn't everything you can kind of see on it is like very functional. It's got wings, it's got kind of a wide body on it, but it doesn't have like a huge splitter on it. The wing isn't massive, but I think it still produces something like 2,000 pounds of downforce. He's got a big splitter on it. Supposedly, from what people say, is that the underbody, the under portion of the car, the aerodynamics under the car is like a work of art, and that's where they generate a lot of their downforce, which is super cool. So yeah, we will definitely have to get him on sometime and talk to him about it. A couple other things, at least that I know of, for Street GT, the championship was pretty much wrapped up, as well as for Street Mod. So both of those championships seem to be wrapped up for the year, so we can kind of hit those a little bit. So let's kind of go back to Lime Rock Park, which I think this will be sort of interesting. We can talk about Lime Rock Park at GridLife, and then the Ridge at Global Time Attack. Both of those literally on opposite ends of the U.S., northwest versus northeast. But that's great, right? I mean, that we have Time Attack basically across the country, but both of them are sort of, fairly short laps, pretty compact tracks. You have some major elevation changes. As I was saying, there's definitely some challenges if you're going to get your car up to temperature. You've got traffic to deal with. Talk to me a little bit about, I know you love talking strategy. Talk to me a little bit about, some of the strategy there. If you're on a short track, do you increase tire temperature or tire pressures to maybe try and get them up to temperature quicker, maybe for that first lap, or do you just know that your first lap may not be your best lap? It may actually be your second lap or third lap.
I mean, obviously, just like anything else, a lot of it comes down to how you prep everything, right? And how you can build up the heat in the tires. With Lime Rock Park, you're talking a 1.5 mile course. The Ridge is almost a 2.5 mile course. So I kind of think of Lime Rock Park as more akin to like a Streets of Willow. That's how I always do things related to courses I've really been to. But in those cases, right, so you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to do your warm-up lap. And for those courses like that, you're going to have to get that thing up and ready to go and really just be able to push it. The good thing is with a short course like that, a lot of times you can easily pull a second lap. And sometimes, it depends on the driver, right? But like you're talking about, it could be the first lap that could be your best. It could be the second lap that's your best. It just really depends on, what ends up the temperature of the track. Temperature, like I was at the Ridge, and the first day it was coming down rain the entire time. And the second day, we had cloud cover for the most of the day. So it was very differing and changing, conditions for the weather. When you start talking about places like Lime Rock Park, though, like these guys were, I believe the weather was good the entire weekend, right? And pretty consistent as a whole. So with that, that helps a lot, because now you can go from, practice day to the sessions that count to the next set, So that's a whole thing that helps each of the drivers, because as they build and build and build upon their lap times, they're able to capitalize on all the things that they learn at each one of the sessions. So you talked about something about where you were saying that they capped off and actually clinched the championship essentially already. So for people that don't know, kind of explain how GridLife works and how they're able to clinch the championship with how many events? Do you know how many events are left in GridLife so far this year?
Yeah, there's 4 events left. So for GridLife, if you want to be part of the year-long championship in your class, you have to do at least 4 events. And I believe that so GridLife runs 2 types of events. So they have a certain type of events that are what they call their festival events. So those are their bigger events that are also live streamed. And then they also have the club weekends, which are not live streamed, but they still count. They still count towards year-end points. But they want, if you're going to be involved in the championship, they want at least 2 of your events to be part of the festivals, be part of the live stream, so that spectators, people who are watching online, get to see, okay, like this is the person leading the championship, right, or won the championship.
I don't think it'd be too hard to convince these guys to show up to the live stream event, though. And I've been unlucky enough to never attend the festival, but I imagine, again, I believe those festivals and the live stream events, they seem to sell out like incredibly fast.
Hotcakes. Very much so.
It's quite insane to me. Like, I get it.
They go quickly.
A really cool event, but wow. Like, that's something we'll end up touching at a later date, because I want to dig into that whole thing at a later date. But go ahead.
They go on. They some of them will sell out. I mean, we're talking about minutes. Most of them for the festivals will sell out in minutes. The club weekends can take a little bit longer. So 4 events total, 2 festivals, or at least 2 festivals. They could all be festivals, but at least 2 festival events. And basically, the way the point structure works is you get 25 points for a win for first place, and then basically they back down the points from there. So second place gets, I don't know exactly what the point structure is, but maybe 20 points. Third place gets like 18, fourth place, and so on, right? The other additional way you can get points is if you set a lap record. If you reset a lap record, you get an additional
incentive.
Point. That's right, yeah. And that lap record can be set at any point. It can be, during the weekend. It could be your first run. It could be your last run. Doesn't matter. It can be set at any point. what's interesting is that last year, so we'll talk about Street GT. So Street GT, Andy Vogel has wrapped up has mathematically wrapped up the championship for this year. What's interesting is that last year, Ido Waxman actually had a perfect season. So he did in 4 of the events, he won and he set lap records. So he ended up with a total of 104 points. So basically, four wins for 25 points plus 4 extra bonus points for lap records. So that was pretty amazing, right? Like everybody was like, "Wow, like that's like that's awesome." I think he might have been I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think he might have been the only one last year, to actually have a perfect season. So this year, everybody was basically Ido, the reigning champion. They thought that he was sort of going to be the one to beat. And boy, Andy Vogel and his C8 Corvette has really spoiled the party. So actually, Andy came in this year, and he has now done a perfect season. So he has done 4 wins, and he has reset the lap records that were set last year by Ido. So big props to Andy Vogel.
What happens since there's more than 8 events, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if a guy comes in and does 4 events, 4 records, gets that perfect score, and another guy comes in and does the same thing, and they both only competed, like, if they compete in a 5th event, does it determine based off that 5th event at that juncture?
No, yeah, good question. So the way they do it is basically they have some tiebreakers. Okay. One of them, I can't remember exactly which order they're in, but one of them is actually head-to-head wins. So if they were both at an event together,
that's a good one to do. Yeah.
Right. Who has more wins head to head, and then I think even after that, I know one of the other ones is Midwest Fest is sort of GridLife's sort of like champion event. It's
the haymaker.
It's one that they really push and promote. It's the one that they kind of want everyone to go to and have the most competition, right? They want all the big drivers there for that event. So that is also one of the tiebreakers where if you were to win, if one of your wins was at Midwest Fest, that can be another tiebreaker, depending on how far down you go. I think there also might be another one for how many records that you may have set. So that also could be a tiebreaker. So if you set more records at a track or at tracks than your competitor, that can also be a tiebreaker. So they do. Speaking of records, they do account for that.
So one thing that amazes me more than anything about this event is when I look at the results, of which I'm just going to say this: GridLife, come on, man, give me a results page that just shows me like the results of this event, not the results of the entire series. Come on, guys. But when I look at the results that I found on Facebook, every single class has a new record. Yeah, every single one, and I'm stoked for that. That is. At first, I literally had one of those moments where I went, "Is this the first year they ever went to this track?" Because
right.
Normally it doesn't happen like that, where there's so many records falling in a single event. So I was really excited to see that. I thought it was really cool, and that just kind of tells me what kind of competition that's going on at these events with GridLife. So that was really exciting for me to see that they were able to do that. So kind of give us a rundown. Like you said, you talked to some of the competitors. What was going on that kind of led to that?
Yeah, it's this is GridLife's third year to run and third consecutive year to run at Lime Rock Park. They first were there in 2022, then they ran there last year, 23, and now this year in 24. This was their third year. So obviously the first year in 2022, all the records are being set. Whoever had the fastest laps, in their class got the record. In 2023, it was pretty interesting. That not many records were reset. There were a handful that were reset.
Yeah, about 5.
Especially depending on like Global Time Attack, GridLife also still kind of have drivetrain records, so they'll have overall records for a class, but then they'll also do drivetrain records within that class. So they'll have an all-wheel drive record, a front-wheel drive record, and a rear-wheel drive record.
Just a curious question. In the results on Facebook, does that show, I'm trying to look here. Does that actually show the records that are in the individual classes as well?
So that's just going to be, the records we were looking at earlier, are the results are just showing overall records.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because in
those
Street
aren't
GT,
specific.
What is it? You had Vogel and Connor both set records, and it just has Vogel. Okay.
Yep.
I was just trying to get my head straight on.
I get it. Yeah. So what was interesting is I noticed the same thing when I was watching the live stream and realizing that a lot of the records that they kept talking about were from 2022, and I was like, I was a little surprised, right? Because you would tend to think first year there they're going to set sort of a benchmark. The second year there, now that people have more time at the track, right? Like that may be people's first time there at Lime Rock Park who normally run with GridLife. They've come back for a second year. They've made upgrades to their car. They have more time at the track. They've got data. They can review. They can probably go faster, right? So that was sort of my thought process. And I was like, gosh, they didn't really seem to set as many records as I expected in 2023, the second year. So I was talking to some of the guys and trying to figure out, like, couldn't really remember, like, was the weather bad, or was there, was it like hot? Was it cold? Was it maybe a little rainy or something going on? But that wasn't really the case. Just for whatever reason, the records from 2022 seemed to stand for at least a year, or I guess for 2 years. And then this year, which is still amazing, as you said. I mean, it's just awesome to see every class record was broken by the winner. So big congrats to everybody who won their class, big time.
Yeah, it looks like, I'm just, public mathing here for a second. I know it's only addition, but I want to say when I look at their records book, it's 11 records were set.
Yep, that's right.
At this event, which is phenomenal. One of those things where I'm super excited, and we'll throw it up on the screen here so you guys can see all the records that were set, because that's even too many just to talk about, right? The second we'll have to break that down. It'll, if we want to do some interviews with some people and find out, how the event was in terms of that and how they were able to set them. There's some names that jump out at me.
Sure.
Like Brad Perkins, who was also at GTA Coda. He's got that BMW. I know you love some BMWs. So,
come on, boys.
I know he'd done some changes to his car, and he came out and got himself a record, baby. So he's pretty excited about that, I guarantee. So it's awesome to see these records fall. So
So speaking of looking at track mods, so Brad, so he's got an E46 M3 that's definitely got an engine swap. Does not sound like an S54. It's got to be an LS. You maybe know more about it.
What's funny is I look directly in that engine bay, and I can look in my memory banks, and I want to say I could tell you for sure, but I can't. I do not recall.
Yeah.
I'll have to
it's definitely got
an
engine swap. Yeah. But what's crazy is Brad Perkins ran a 54.666, and he got the record and won track mod by 33 thousandths. So Kyle McHugh runs a 54.699, right? So we're talking about 300ths separating them. Which is extremely, extremely tight. I'd kind of want to know, like, what is that in terms of a distance? I'm sure you could calculate it if you wanted to, but right, like,
dude, that's like a front bumper.
Like a bumper, right?
Yeah, like it is. That is nothing, literally nothing. When you start actually like breaking it down to time on track, like when you, it's
awesome.
Funny. I don't know if you've ever watched those. F1, and they'll take the two cars, put them next to each other, and like run them around the track, and then they'll come in and they'll be, like you just said, right, a couple thousandths or hundredths or something like that away, even tenths. tense is like indistinguishable. So yeah, it's absolutely astounding that those guys were able to put down such similar lap times. You know, because you do see other things like Street Mod, right, with Alan Patterson and Kyle McHugh, where you're talking about a 53.8, which Alan Patterson set that record, and then Kyle McHugh set a 55. So that's roughly, you know, a little over 1.5 seconds ish. I'm terrible at math.
Which, shout out to Alan Patton. Set a crazy record, right? Like, winning by that's 1.3 seconds over Kyle McHugh. And normally, especially right, because you're at such a short track, like 1.3 seconds is a much larger margin than that delta indicates, because you're at such a short track, right? Like, half a second turns into a second or a second and a half at most normal tracks. So to have a second and a half, just unbelievable by Alan Patton. Shout out to him, which he has stormed onto the GridLife scene, which, as we mentioned earlier, he's locked up the Street Mod championship for this year. 4 wins, 4 records. He's put out a couple funny videos in one of on his Instagram, and one of them he was like in his shop, and he's got the he was talking about, you know, like he was super happy with the season. So he's wrapped up. He's not running any more events. And he was talking about, you know, he's just super proud, and you know, he had a clean sweep this year. And then he ended the video. He had like the 4 first place trophies like on the ground, and he had like a broom, and he was like sweeping up, right, like he was closing up shop. You know, I was like, that's pretty funny. It was pretty good. So big shout out to Alan Patton. He's come on this year, set some very fast times. And I mean, right, if you follow GridLife, I mean, you know, Street Mod was Jackie Ding's playground for 3 or 4 years, right? Setting times and just resetting those. And Alan's come in this time. Now, granted, he's in a Supra just like Jackie Ding was, but they've kind of continued to develop that, and he's now reset every record that Jackie Ding had for the 4 tracks that Alan went to. So big shout out to him.
Yeah, that's freaking awesome. That's a tough class to be in. I know that class has been notoriously ran in by people that just are really fast. So yeah, big shout out to him. That's a big accomplishment to be able to go in there and run that the way that you're talking about how he's running it. So big shout out to him. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah. One other thing, right? So we'll stay in Street Mod. Kyle McHugh came in second. So you may be thinking, what is this, deja vu? Wasn't Kyle McHugh in second behind Brad Perkins? He was. So Kyle McHugh actually has done this now twice. The past 2 events at GridLife, he has run both in Street Mod and Track Mod. The only difference is he comes into the pits. He takes his Street Mod tires off, which are 200 tread wear, and then he puts on his Track Mod tires, which I think is 100 tread wear, maybe 60 tread wear, but basically just a lower tread wear tire. And then he goes back out. So
it'd be interesting to find out what exact tire that he runs at each of, like, in each class. I'm making an assumption he's with Jackie Ding, so I assume they're Nankangs. So
he's definitely on the CRSs.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to know
mod.
what he's running in Track Mod. What is he running in there? Because I mean, the delta isn't very much. I mean,
no.
What is that? That's a half-second delta in his lap time between. So this is one of those things, right? 2 different classes. Now, granted, my assumption is this: Kyle McHugh is not running to the edge of Track Mod in terms of rulebook, because he can't, because otherwise he'd be out of scope of Street Mod. But what it does instinctively bring up to me, now granted, again, you said it before, when you're talking about a sub 1 minute lap, every second is kind of a lot longer than what it really is in terms of track, right? We'd probably have to go back and look at the results from the last event where he did the same thing to kind of see what a bigger delta it was. But it'd be very interesting to kind of, if he continues to do this throughout the entirety of the year, it'd be interesting to kind of look at it as an overarching, and I kind of imagine that GridLife might be interested in that kind of data as well, where they're looking at like, okay, how can a guy from Street Mod compete in track mod? Now, granted, I'll also say this: if he was Alan Patton and winning and setting records, that also makes a huge difference as well. Now, I don't know Kyle McHugh's build out enough. I know I know enough that knowing that he makes a lot of horsepower. I know he has good parts on the car. I know he has like good support, but I just don't know enough to know like when he enters into track mod, how deep is he into track mod? Is he like a 3/4 to the rules guy? Is it further?
Yeah.
Or it's kind of an interesting situation to
for sure. I agree with you. I think there's sort of two thoughts to. So in both events that Kyle McHugh has run, both street mod and track mod, he's podiumed in both classes. I don't think he's won either class, but he's at least podiumed in both classes. And I think you can kind of think of, two reasons immediately come to my mind, which is one, the rule sets put in by GridLife are not differentiated enough between the two classes. And so that was one thing I went and looked at, and I'll hit on that in a second. And then the other being, are the competitors in track mod are the competitors there just not built to the full rule set if there is enough differentiation between the two classes? And I think that most likely the answer is probably a combination of both, right? The majority
and one more thing, and that Supra is the ultimate cheater car in... Sorry, had to say it.
Say it again. Say it again, louder for the people in the back. Say it again. So I think, right, like the majority of people in track mod, a lot of people get put into track mod because they have their cars and they've gutted it. They've gutted the interior. And that's where you get put into if you've done that you get put into track mod. So a lot of people fall victim to that. They're not necessarily built to the full scope of the rules or even 75%, but they gutted their car and they put in a cage and they're like, well, now if you want to run with GridLife, you got to run in track mod.
Yeah, many people run into that in time attack in general.
Yeah.
These guys run in HPD events, and all of a sudden they come out and want to do time attack, and I know, and we always, in any time attack I've ever been to, whether it be GTA, Redline, GridLife, all the ones I've ever been to, there's always that one guy who's missing some interior piece and is complaining his ass off over there, talking about how they won't run because I'm missing, and it's like, yeah, those are the rules. Follow the rules. I understand it's annoying, but follow the rules.
Yep.
Sorry, that was my rant.
I agree. I agree. That is interesting. If you kind of look at the track mod versus street mod, I don't run in either of those classes. I've kind of looked at them. Right, the aero is not all that much different. Street mod, you can have 5 inches of a front splitter. And the wing, I think, can be 5 inches like wider than the car. And track mod,
and it can go back, right? It can. I assume it can go backwards.
Yeah, it can go back a little bit. Yeah, and track mod, I think everything is pretty much the same, other than you can go up to 6 inches. So the aero is not that much different. Obviously,
that's an interesting thing there, because
I agree.
I would have expected a more differentiating factor with aero, especially, but I know that in a lot of series that's kind of being the mode of contention, right? And then when you start talking about, like, being honest again, when you start talking about like Supras and being able to just flappy paddle those shifter changes, right? A guy like Brad Perkins, I think he had a sequential, or he put in a sequential, and so makes it a lot more difficult for a guy like Brad versus a guy like Kyle. I don't know what Chris runs off the top of my head, Chris Smith. But it does make it a lot more difficult for guys like that, because they're having to install those parts into there rather than starting off with a car that has that, which nothing against Kyle McHugh on that. That's preferential, that you made the decision to pick whichever vehicle you want to pick to start off and run in time attack. It's just that's your choice. But it is interesting, and that's why I always go down the road of the Supra is that little bit of a cheater car, just because that it's a great car. It's a great car.
Well,
I can't
It
say much more.
It is it is a great car, and I don't know what you're trying to say, Jaeger. I love me some flappy paddles. All right? I love me some flappy paddles. That was one reason why I went with my M4 DCT dual clutch.
It's quick.
It's so much
It's
fun.
the way to go. You're keeping your hands on the wheel. You're doing. I mean, purist people will cry their little eyes out about how it's not pure. It's faster.
Yeah.
We're here for speed. We're here for records. We're here for time attack. This isn't about just purist baby stuff. This is like you got to go as fast as you possibly can. I'm going to dive into this real quick, right?
Okay. All right.
So this goes into that weird spot. We'll talk about rules at some juncture, and this is where I go down that weird road where I start going into that realm of why do we penalize guys for putting a flappy paddle in their car when I can go buy a Supra or I can go buy an M4 or an M3 or whatever, and it comes with it, versus me in my Mustang, right? Because, I mean, granted, they make a 10-speed auto that you can flappy paddle. It just will break every 30 seconds. But at the end of the day, like, if I'm penalized by buying a cheaper car that's more affordable to me to get into the sport, I don't know. Just something to think about.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think, part of that might be those are rules that were left over from 5-10 years ago, where you did not have the prevalence of the dual clutch transmissions. Well, actually, I mean, you had the dual clutch transmissions,
but they were in such high-end cars.
But they were in really high-end cars. I mean, now you're seeing the automatics, right, that are in the new Supras. They're not even dual clutch. They're just kind of your standard, upgraded automatics. I mean, those now operate as well as the dual clutches of 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a little bit of a holdover from some of those older rule sets. And I kind of agree, right? I mean, now the majority of cars are coming with them, right? I mean, some manufacturers are like, 5 speeds, 6 speeds, whatever. They're gone. We're only doing automatics. We're only doing, dual clutch transmissions.
The world's getting lazy, my friend. Everybody wants to be able to flap the gear and move on.
Yeah. Listen, to those purists, if you want to row those gears because you find it more fun, have at it. I'll be blowing by you with my flappy paddles.
All right. So give us a summary. Everything else that we haven't covered yet about GridLife, break it down for us real last quick.
So, I guess a couple other things. I mean, the other big thing was Sasha Anise, who was running in Unlimited. Go check out his, while I talk about it, Jaeger, look up his Instagram handle so we can tell some of the folks about it.
Put me on the spot.
I know. His 370Z is just like it's clean. Although I will say, if you listen to our episode, our first episode 2 weeks ago, you'll know that Jaeger does not think you have a time attack car unless it has a livery, and I did not see a livery on Sasha's car. It's wrapped.
Gonna have to ban him.
It's probably wrapped.
We're gonna have to ban him right there.
Sasha Sasha Anise does not have a time attack car, no livery. So sorry, man.
Yeah, and his Instagram handle is, you can't say it aloud. It's it's Sasha Anise 14. Sasha Anise 14. Absolutely an epic car. Like, this is one car I have not seen in person, and I'm truly sad I have not seen it in person. He had some problems kind of early on, I think, in the development. I think at Laguna, the hybrid system wasn't working, or something happened.
Yep, that's right.
But like, I love all the engineering that goes into this car and how he's built it. It's such an epic. Like I said, I gotta get him. We gotta get him on the show and talk to him about this car. And again, we'll splash the car up on here and let you guys see it real quick. But it's an absolutely beautiful Z. Just one of those cars that, again, like I always say in Time Attack, right? If I walk by this car, I'd have to pull my phone out and take a picture of it. And that's exactly what you want. That's exactly what you need to do in Time Attack.
Yeah. And last year, 2023, he had set the overall record at 51.1, and then he reset that this year by half a second, 50.6. Which again, as we've been saying, I mean, half a second is pretty substantial on a 50-second lap. So big congrats to him. He's really got that car well dialed in. And I'll also note, I mean, he was running at least 2 or 3 laps at a time. So he had that car really well sorted. He's got a VQ engine in that I think makes her roughly about 500 horsepower. He's somewhere in the 500 horsepower range, and then he's got a hybrid battery system that also I think pumps out about 175 horsepower. Car weighs somewhere around the 2,800 pound range, so it's not like super light, but it's not.
And here it is, real quick, just for you guys to see. Like, this is Sasha's car. Absolutely beautiful, stunning. He's done so much aero work on it. It just looks great. Like, I'm actually shocked, though. I will say this. So, Kilgore, are you shocked that the splitter's not larger?
I yes and no.
I'm even going to give him a like, just because, I'm already here. I might as well like this photo.
Yeah. Because, that's something interesting that you tend to see. I mean, you definitely tend to see really large splitters on time attack cars. But I also kind of, and this was something that stuck out to me last year at Global Time Attack, when you had a lot of those GT3 cars, like you had the McLaren, whatever that was, the GT3X or whatever. But now, granted, I get that those are like professionally developed cars with hundreds, probably thousands of hours.
And they're generally working within a rule set, and they're usually wheel-to-wheel racing, which you can't have a huge splitter on it.
Sure. So that's fair. But I mean, if you look at some of the downforce numbers that those cars generate, I mean, they're not using huge dual element wings or triple element wings. They're not using 8-foot splitters. They usually have pretty mild aero, but they still develop a lot of downforce. And so I mean, I think that sort of, obviously, aerodynamics is a black art, anyway. It's all that wizardry. And there's obviously various ways you can go about it, but I mean, I think it's cool. I think it's super cool that he doesn't have a huge aero, that he doesn't have huge aero. I did see a couple pictures, like you can see under his front splitter, he actually has like multiple strakes, multiple
he's got a bunch of
diffusers. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just that downforce is being made in a different way.
Yeah, I'd be in, like, again, can't wait. We're going to get him on the show. We have to. And just to understand the choices he made and how he did it, because that's what it's all about, right? You're making choices and compromises, and it might be a situation where he saw too much drag on a larger splitter, and he didn't want to make 3,000 horsepower to be able to push the car around the track. So
maybe he just didn't want to take the splitter off every time he loaded it onto his trailer.
I'm betting he's still doing that. That thing's pretty low.
Maybe.
All right, so let's jump right in. We're going to get into the Ridge Motorsports Park Speed Summit by Global Time Attack. You might have heard me say those words a few times over the last few weeks with all of our driver intros and so on and so forth. Again, I actually went to this event, and so I'm just going to start it off right here and say, so I went to this event, and, it's one of those things. I'd heard, a friend of mine, Amir, just a friend, guy who kind of goes fast sometimes. He had told me a while back, he's like, this track is hot. He's like, this is a great time attack track. And I heard what he said. It sounded pretty good, but it didn't really resonate with me all that much. Just kind of thought, it must have been pretty cool, right? But getting there, it's kind of a weird vibe when like you pull in and like you see the front straightaway and you see like their corkscrew, and that's it. Then you see trees, and apparently everybody in Washington loves trees. That's like a thing or something. A lot of tree hugging going on up there, so I don't know. It's a thing. But the track itself, I finally got to go on track, check the track out, And a lot of you guys might have seen the video of me and Cuban rolling around the track in the wet and in the dry. And I immediately got to the point where I was like, this track is freaking awesome. This track has got those links where like you had to link these corners together. Otherwise, you were going to blow an entire lap. It had the areas that you're going to have to speed in, get the braking zone perfectly, and get the car turned. It had low speed. It had high speed. It had a little bit of everything. It wasn't a track that was going to be one of those tracks. It's like, yeah, if I make 1,000 horsepower, I'm blowing everybody else out of the water, without even a chance. It's a course you can get away with having a lower horsepower car, but you have to have a better handling car. You can get away with it by having a little bit faster of a car and have a less handling car. It wasn't going to be, a completely independent track of everything, right? So track was absolutely amazing. That's one thing for me immediately that made me kind of fall in love with it right from the get-go. Now I will say this. So I had the joy of kind of talking for about half a day about basically nothing because it rained. Basically for the very first day, for half of the day, all it did was rain. And let me tell you, when it rains like that, that sucks. That sucks for time attack, right? You're never going to set a lap record in the wet. And I don't care what I've heard Dewey say some weird things where he's talking about like, oh, there's a wet lap rec. No such thing. Get out of here, because now you're having to differentiate between, is the track damp? Is it wet? No, there's just track records, and that's all there is to it. We're getting away from silliness here. But I will say this, Lawrence Yun in his Porsche GT3, it's 911 Cup car, let me say it right, in the GTX class, dude was flying, just straight flying in that class, in that car. It was freaking insane in the wet, like full wet. I think he actually had like full wets for that event.
I was wondering.
Yeah, I didn't go check, but I kind of peeped around on Instagram and stuff like that, and I kind of saw a couple of those posts, and I believe he had full wets. Because if he didn't have full wets, that man's just insane. Like,
yeah.
Insane.
It looked like he was moving a lot of water off those tires.
But, I will say this, like Skylar Johnson, he ended up finishing 4th place in Enthusiast. That dude was having a freaking ball of a time, and in the wet, he was still going crazy fast. Young kid, actually. He was there, looked like with his family, his dad, and maybe like a friend or a brother. And they were kicking it, having a good old time. And the dude was just flying around the track. He ended up, just missing the podium by like 0.2 of a second, but still, like, crazy good lap times. The guy was having a good time, and that's what time attack's all about, right? It's just going out there having a good time and hoping to set a lap record. So
let me ask you a question on that, which is, if you have like if day one or maybe a practice session or something like that is going to be wet, from your experience, like, do you find that it helps to go out anyway? I mean, sure, like if you don't know the track, if you've never been to the track, you can go out and do some siding laps, right? Like kind of like what you and Cuban did, at least get a feel for where the track goes, where the blind crest, corners, etc. Like that, I can get that. But sometimes I kind of wonder, is it detrimental to really be out there pushing in the wet? Because then that sort of anchors you no pun intended, in terms of like when you actually get out there and now it's dry, you had all of these markers sort of in your brain that had been ingrained, and now you've got to redo all that. Like, do you feel like, is it better just to not go out and just go out when it's dry? What are your thoughts on that? I kind of go back and forth.
So for me, if it's me, and I'm going to give a good example. So Bailey Woods, right? Bailey Woods never had been there. He done simulator work and watched laps on YouTube. That's all the reference he had. Yep. His car, an unlimited class car with only slicks, didn't bring any rain tires. And he didn't go out until it completely stopped raining and the track dried. Sure. And I would 100% agree that is the better move. And I say that because if I try to go out when it's wettish or dampish with that car on slicks, the track's going to feel terrible. it's going to instantly put you in a situation where he's learning the track. He's building those like you said, building those markers in his head, and he's going to build muscle memory around something that's going to be slow. So personally, he actually did exactly what I would have done if possible, right? So on the practice day, he found himself where he borrowed someone's like rental car and just went out and did sighting laps. Not a bunch, just a few. Because one thing about the Ridge that I learned is there's a lot of blind corners. A lot of them. So you got to get out there and you got to see it. You got to touch it, feel it. And he was able to do that with that. So an interesting situation ended up happening. So Bailey Woods ends up saying, this is, I want to say it was the third session of the first day. I hope I was right. I was there. Third session of the first day.
I think that's right.
He went out. Kevin Phillips, on the other hand, didn't go out. He said, the track's not quite there. And it's that judgment call, right? It's the judgment call the driver has to make, or the team has to make, and say, is the track ready? Kevin said no. Bailey said yes. Bailey went out there and instantly was turning. I think he turned like a 44 in that session or something like that.
It was quick.
Already like super quick. And so we were obviously, the announcers were able to go, oh, that was a mistake by Kevin. Maybe he should have got his butt out there, blah, blah, blah. But
is Kevin the one in the S10?
Yeah, he's the S10 guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, like, they have to make those decisions. They have to make sure that they're comfortable. And so going back to your question, my answer is I would hold off. I would say a sighting lap, especially on slicks in the rain, not worth it. Doesn't make any sense. Get there on the practice day. If you need that much, practice or, getting up to speed, you should be there on the practice day. Get it right. Do it right. But so now we'll kind of jump into everything else of the event. So it rained. That sucked. But apparently it does that up in Washington. Apparently it rains. Pfft. And then it was cloudy for the rest of the time. Again, I don't even know what clouds are. Southern California, just stay here. It's way better, except for, the 110-degree heat. And then, so these guys started going out and just burning up tires and having a good time from that point on. And, again, we were we're rooting everybody. We're trying to hope that everyone goes faster and faster. Bailey was looking for that sub 140 lap. He ended up with a 140.7 in unlimited class, which is still an amazing time. I mean, the dude literally has, I can't remember the horsepower number off the top of my head, but I think it's like sub 300 horsepower. And he ended up winning unlimited class and, doing amazing, a 140.7. Just an astonishing lap time, to start. The overall record set is by Cable Rosenberg in his naturally aspirated Viper. So that's to be 3 seconds, basically a little more than 3 seconds off that time. That's amazing. Like it really is. And then Kevin Phillips, he finished second, and again, he did an amazing job. And we'll talk about third place real quick. So in Unlimited, Justin Moore. So I talked to this kid before, and I shouldn't say kid, he's not a kid. But I talked to Justin Moore. He pulls up and he's like, yeah, I signed up for Time Attack, but it's a Subaru, so I'm just trying to do some break-in laps, and I don't know, I'm probably not even gonna be that fast. And he's giving me this shebang, and I'm like, dude, you're here. Is the car running? Yeah. Time Attack it. It's a Time Attack car. And so, obviously not just me. His whole team was kind of spurring him on, like, come on, man, we're already here. So he finally says, screw it, and does Time Attack. And what does he do? He ends up setting the new unlimited class all-wheel drive record at a 144.608. So,
that's awesome.
How awesome it is for that guy that he's able to come out and ended up being in a situation where he's now setting an all-wheel drive record, unlimited class. He gets to hold that for an entire year without a doubt, because no one else is going to the Ridge from Time Attack organizations, especially global. So he's going to be able to hold that record for an entire year. Another honorable mention here from Maxwell Motorsports, Danny Maxwell and Eric Johnson. Johnson actually was the driver in the record. So Unlimited front wheel drive set a record of a 155.423, and they ended up setting an awesome record there. And this again was kind of like a weird Cinderella story where these guys built this Lemons car and went from Lemons to now Time Attack, and it kind of shocks you. Like, it's a DA Integra that, I'm not gonna lie, looks a little shitty on the outside. And but these guys took a Lemons car, threw a K24 in it, which when you pop the hood, you're like, oh, wasn't expecting that. And then he put a Borg Warner turbo on it, on top of it, and they've done that in the last like 3 months. And so they were going through all sorts of struggles, dude. Like, for the entire weekend, they were struggling it. And it was funny. I was talking to Danny. Danny's like, yeah, every time I go out, this is popping off, this is breaking, this is happening. And he's like, we put this thing together with duct tape and bubble gum. Eric goes out, this thing holds together the entire lap and just lets him belt out a 155.
Man, that's awesome.
It's one of those like hilarities of things. But I'd have to say, like, the first record that actually went down in the damp session, James Avila Avelina, I'm going to go with Avelina this time, 152.690 in enthusiast class front wheel drive. He actually ended up winning the entire class of enthusiast class, but he broke the record for enthusiast class front wheel drive to start the weekend on the third session, which was a damp session. And basically, the next session, he went out and reset the record again, and then reset it again on a future lap. So he basically broke a record 3 times in a row, which is freaking awesome that he was able to accomplish that and get that done. So kudos to him. That was an awesome job. And he's driving a Honda Civic Type R. And so the crazy part was about this guy. So I talked to him a little bit after the event. After day one, it was all wet still and kind of like damp in the pits. And in the pits, one of his buddies noticed, hey, man, is there oil under your car? And what ended up happening was the oil filter had some sort of like failure or turned or did something. And literally one of those situations where he had lost a quart of oil and it was continuing like to lose. So he got super lucky that his buddy spotted it. They were able to, it was something bigger than just like the oil filter itself, because they had to go get parts and then like tighten it up or do whatever they did. But they got super lucky that they were able to get this thing sorted and fixed and get it all back together. So, that's just one of those things. You gotta get under these cars and check them, all the time. That's just what you got to do. A couple of cars to note. You had Jarek Rourke in his 240. Really bitchin' car. It was a street class car that he kind of turned back into an enthusiast class car for this event. But yeah, pretty cool car.
So I kind of want to go back to something you mentioned about Justin Moore, right, and his WRX STI, which, like, that is something that I wish more people would do. Is right, like, he was signed up. I think you said he signed up for the track days, and then he kind of got there, and people were like, come on, dude, just do Time Attack, like, just jump in and do it. You've got a car, you're at the event, just like go do it. And I feel like, so many times you hear people be like, oh, well, I'm still working on my build. It needs to be faster. Like, I'm not going to be competitive.
There's always something to be done of these things, man. Yeah, always something.
Absolutely. The guy showed up. Yeah, the guy showed up. You know what? Like, he said, you know what? Like, I'm going to do it, and ends up on the podium and a record. Like, just do it. You know what? Like, that's why Nike had such a great slogan. Like, just do it.
Yeah.
Like just get out there and compete. Just do it.
And he's a super chill dude. It kind of sucks because he said he was out on his laps, and everybody's aim or whatever lap timer always says you can do a faster lap, blah 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 blah. But he said he was actually up 2 seconds. He was on pace for a 42. His drive shaft let go. Then he went and Stefan Dunham was able to give him his drive shaft after he had some engine-related issues because he owns a Subaru, and ended up in a situation where he was generous enough to give Justin his drive shaft. So Justin throws a drive shaft in and tries to go out and do another lap, and it was kind of sad, actually. So he went out, he did like a lap, he pulled in, and then he like launched it out of the pits, broke another drive shaft. So there's got to be
Man.
something wrong with that car, something on the on the drivetrain side. That you don't break two carbon fiber drive shafts just magically like that, and he don't make enough power, and he's not. I honestly don't even remember if he was running slicks, to be honest with you. But I know he's damn well not making enough power to blow a drive shaft off of one launch. Like that, just not a chance. So
Yeah.
but
So one thing I noticed while I was watching, which was a little surprising. Maybe you can provide some insight, which is it was raining all day, most of the day Saturday. It was raining most of the day Saturday. And it started to dry out, and you could start to see some of the guys, right, as you've mentioned, they started to set some times. But I guess I was expecting bigger drops in times Sunday.
agreed.
And they didn't drop as much as I expected, which is one, people were just really flying and really throwing it down on Saturday, which may be, good for them. I guess I would have thought that people would have had, been a little timid. There were still some wet spots on Saturday. It's not like the track was fully dry, but I don't know. I mean, what did you make of that? I mean, especially like the one I think of is Bailey Woods in particular, right? Like he only dropped a few, maybe a couple seconds at most. I kind of was expecting him to really start laying it down, but and some of the other guys as well. I mean, George Zhao and his Audi R8, like it took him most of the day on Sunday until he really laid down that one flyer, which he was on fire for, literally on fire, which was wild. I think it was maybe Time Attack News. Shout out to your hat, like got a fantastic shot of him going up through one of the turns, and you could see some flames, some small flames coming out the back. It was a cool shot, but. What did you think was going on? I mean,
it's weird because we asked drivers this too, because a big thing, it just didn't make sense. Like we saw, obviously third and fourth session, we saw some rapid times, and we were like, "Oh, Sunday is coming. The rain stopped. They're putting rubber down." And so I was actually talking to Lawrence Yoon, right? And one of the things that he mentioned, which is relevant at GridLife, GTA, at all these time attack events now, is he was saying that he believed it to be partly due to the fact that they allow drifting on track. And
Drifters.
they're laying down the drifter ugly rubber of those like 700 treadwear tires that they run. And with that, they're putting down this crappy rubber, and then they're having to work through that rubber and so on and so forth. And that's kind of where he put the blame at. But again, I wouldn't say that's 100%, right? Like, yeah, that could have been some cases in some places, but it was strange. And I think I heard some other people talking about this before. I was listening to the Professionally Awesome podcast, right? I think I want to call it Hell Functional. Might be it. But those guys actually talked about an interesting thing where you're talking about like California-based tracks. California tracks like Buttonwillow that don't see rain that often, when they get rain across them, it's a huge detriment to the track. But courses like the Ridge that sees rain all the time, it's not as big of a detriment in terms of like washing away the rubber or the whatever you want to call it, the buildup that's on the tracks. I mean, I was on the track when it was raining, and there was waterfalls going down the corkscrew. So it was definitely, quite a bit of wetness out there. But with that said, I'm going to go with a little bit of both, right? Like, okay. I don't particularly, like, from a time attacker standpoint, get the drifters off the track. Just let them stay in their little parking garage or little roped-in area. Keep them locked up in jail, drifter jail. My opinion. I understand spectacle. I completely get it. But like, it's one of those things where I dislike the concept of those guys going out there, and they're going to have offs. And we have offs too in time attack, but when they have offs, they just power out, roost it, they dig divots, and just, I don't know. Like, that's just me being a time attacker and saying, I don't particularly like the drifters on track, no matter what it is and no matter who it is. I understand from a spectacle standpoint. Although, to me, again, the Ridge, you can't see them 95% of the time. So I don't particularly understand, like, just stay in the hot pits, or stay in the pits, do your thing out there. But I want to mention a couple of other things. I'll let you talk about the drifters real quick.
I was just going to say, the first time, actually it's been the only time that I have run into that situation, and I was actually surprised how much it. Actually, no, there's been 2 times. At Carolina Motorsports Park, and then at Midwest Fest. Both of those, really, it was more of Midwest Fest. I was surprised by how much the drift rubber affected lap times. I mean, you could tell, right? Like the early morning session before the drifters were out there, the track was really good. And then you go out there after a drift session and you feel like you're driving faster, you're braking later, but like the times just don't reflect it. And yeah, I mean, like it is like, we're not just using it as a racer's excuse. Like,
I mean, we got a lot of
it
those.
definitely has, it definitely has a detriment. But to your point, right? Like, I guess that just goes more, if that's going to be the case, that's just going to be more of like your strategy, right? Like,
Yep.
Once
if you
those
know the
drifters
drifter
are on
session
course,
is going to be the 4th session, then you got to go lay it down in the 3rd. Like,
yep.
That's just, like you said, you just have to know, like, oh, I'm not going to put the new tires on after the drifters go out there. I'm going to wait, and I'm going to run it, 5 sessions after they go, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, so I'll touch a little bit on, so the big, I'd have to say, I'll hit street class really quickly. So we had Ryan Frazier. We were coming into that event, and there was another guy that was supposed to come out, and we really expected him to be able to break Amir's record. But apparently something happened, and I got to dig deeper into this. But I heard words that he got into some sort of accident, broke some ribs, some other stuff, and so he was unable to come out. So like the guy who was probably like the top seed in the class ended up not making it. Ryan Frazier comes out, and like in talking with him and looking at his car and stuff like that, I was like, oh, this guy's a contender. Like, this is absolutely an option for him to be able to break this record. And especially what we saw on Saturday, again, this was one of those situations where we looked at Saturday's times and we were thinking Saturday to Sunday. Oh, we're like, oh, he's going to do it. This is going to be a cakewalk. But Frazier ended up in a situation where he got kind of locked in at a 144 and just stayed there. And it sucked because we kept pushing and kept hoping that he was going to be able to break a record. But I think, he's one of those guys. He's in a Supra. In comparison to other super guys out there, he's not making a bunch of power. I think he's like 550, so he could easily turn up power and go bigger and all the other jazz within that class. He could easily probably add more aero and do this and the other. But his car's pretty simple. Like, he still had stock seats in this thing. Stock seats. So, I mean, this isn't like a full-blown, like, street class, like, gnarly build. And he's still, I mean, he's a ways off at 2 seconds. But he was still 2 seconds off of Amir's lap time. And if anybody's seen Amir Street Class NSX, that's not a walk in the park, like, nothing car. Like, that was a completely badass street build, even though it was kind of like early days in his street class build. But he was able to put down a good time at 144.5, and I was kind of sad. Another Subaru brethren in Mitchell Huey. I thought that car also had the ability to set a lap record. But man, after the first day, right after that first day, he ended up in a situation where he thought he blew the wastegate, which I think he did blowing the wastegate, but due to the wastegate blowing and it not working correctly, it blew out the turbo. So he ended up with like no boost, nothing working, and had to call it a day after the first day. So he essentially got 2 sessions in a damp and then like a semi-dry condition, and was only able to put down a 151.
Man, that sucks.
Yeah, that was a brutal day for them. They came out and they were looking to do some good stuff. Probably the class that I didn't expect to be as big as it was in terms of like heavy hitters and like hardcore, like every chance there could have been a swap of a place, was limited class. So, and the funny part is obviously George Zhao and Yingjing Pan, they're buddies. So they're pitting together. And at the same time, these guys are fighting over limited class and seeing who could win. And they both have badass cars. One's got a 911 GT3. The other one's got an R8. Although I'll give George Zhao the nod because, in my opinion, George Zhao has got the more like Time Attack-esque type car. And I was even talking to him, and I was giving him a rash of shit about not having a livery. And he swears to me that he's going to get a livery. So, and he actually said that Pan is also going to get a livery as well. So, kudos to them. Although George still doesn't have a fire suit. So, come on, George. Get it together, buddy. Get it together.
I hope he gets one now, considering what just happened.
I mean, it's just one of those things. Like, those guys need to sack up. All those guys do. And then you got Kasem Farm. So, just kind of for reference, right? So, George Zhao wins limited class with a 139.471. On top of that, he gets the all-wheel drive record and the overall record in limited class. Yingjin Pan sets a 140.156 and gets the rear-wheel drive limited record, which, that's 3 records right there, right off the bat. Like, awesome event. They ended up setting, overall, there was, I think it was 5? Yeah, 5 records in the event as a whole, which is good. Like, that's good for an event that's been going on since 2020. So they're in their 4th year at this event. So that's kind of the essentially it's starting to get to where it's supposed to be in terms of lap times. And then you got, the cool thing to me was at any given time, George or Yingjin or Pan, I'm going to go George or Pan, at any time you could have had a position swap. The lap times were that close where at any time you could have swapped positions. And so that was cool. Sad for George. He didn't get to go out the last session of the day. So George got to do the fun thing where he gets to sit and watch his buddy go out and do his laps and hope that his buddy doesn't beat him. But I assume George was probably sitting over there rooting for his buddy to go faster. That's just, I think, how George is and how Time Attack is in general. And then the cool thing was the last spot on the podium there in limited class, Kasem Farm, and we're going to call him Alex PK because I like that name. That's a cool name. 144.0 to a 144.7. So 7/10, solid. And then even Stefan Denham was a 148.0. So he's still in the ballpark, but his car had engine problems early on. And, so that I don't think that 148 was very representative. I think that car was much faster. He just couldn't get it all put down. But overall, like, the event was solid. I was really, really excited to get out there and kind of meet all those guys out there in the Northwest. Northwest is in a bunch of interesting people. I mean, they love their rain, they love their trees, and apparently they know how to build some badass tracks. I'm going to say it right now. If you kind of are looking for a track in the Northwest, or if you're just looking for a track out west to try out and you love Time Attack, this is a cool track to go check out. I put it right, and I know that some people say Buttonwillow is a little overrated based off of location. It's kind of the same way. Buttonwillow is surrounded by, cows and nothing, and the Ridge is essentially surrounded by trees and nothing. So it's all kind of the same thing. Every track you go to, it's all surrounded by nothing with a racetrack plopped in the middle of it. So that's just what it is.
Yeah, there's usually things about noise and all that kind of stuff where they have to,
people cry about noise and things.
Yeah.
But so, great event, good time.
One thing that I guess I'd like to get your take on it, and you've got to, I mean, it is what it is. You can't make everybody happy, but one thing with Global Time Attack is they've really gone to this season, like a season of events that cover the U.S. They go from Texas, at COTA, they go to Road Atlanta. They did Colorado. They've now got the Ridge, in Northwest U.S. I think they're going to Thermal. Is it Thermal that they're going to be somewhere in? Is it Nevada?
They're going to have Podium Club at Arizona.
Podium Club. Okay, that's what it is. Yeah. Podium Club in Arizona.
One of those private track clubs.
Yeah. So they're going to be down there in the southwest this time. So
and that's an event that's in conjunction. I think it's like South. I'm going to say this right. Ravi's going to kill me. Southwest Festival of Speed, off the top of my head.
I think that's
They're
right.
putting that on, and then Global kind of jumped on board and is doing like the rules, and they'll do like the classing and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I don't think, and then obviously there'll be finals this year at Button Willow, which I thought was pretty cool. They were doing the advertisements for the 20th year of
Hell yeah.
finals at Button Willow, so that's pretty awesome. But what I was sort of realizing was, because Global Time Attack spans the U.S. so much, you rarely get people who travel with Global Time Attack. So you tend to get more regional, localized drivers, right? Like for this weekend at the Ridge, you had a lot of the Northwest drivers, Northern California drivers, right? Like kind of making the trek there. For Button Willow, for finals, you obviously get a lot of people, but right, Road Atlanta, you got a lot of the Southeast people traveling there. And on the one, I'm just not sure how it makes me feel. On the one
Yeah,
hand,
I
I
feel
like
you.
it,
Because the
but
problem it kind of runs into is, like you're saying, it's expensive as all hell to travel this continent, essentially,
it is.
and do time attack. It's absolutely expensive. For a grassroots motorsport, it's really difficult. They used to do what they call the Pro-Am events, which I always thought was awesome. As a SoCal guy, obviously, we did all the Pro-Am events in Southern California, so you hit all these Southern California tracks. It made a lot of sense. It kind of built up so that you could prepare for the pro. It allows you to use the same rule set, build your car, and have competitions you can compete in. And then essentially at that juncture, if you built your car and did your things enough, then you can start competing on the national scale, right? And that was kind of a really cool way to go about it. But like you said, and it's kind of an interesting situation because I kind of see kind of similar things kind of happen with all the time attack groups when you start talking about moving all the way across the U.S. and stuff like that. And that's where I've always said, and we'll get into this at some juncture, I've always said I would like to see, and this is kind of funny because it kind of plays right into like NASA and SCCA and all those other things. I've always wanted to see essentially regional time attack groups where Global Time Attack or GridLife essentially licenses their rules or however you want to call it and gives a namesake and says, okay, we're going to do 5 events in this, like, as close as you possibly can proximity. I mean, I'm
Sure.
kind of spoiled here in Southern California where I can go to 5-6 different tracks in an 8-hour span around me. But you end up in a situation where you kind of go, okay, we're going to do this many events, and it's going to be a event that it allows people to grow, build their cars, gives them something to because it's hard. It's hard to build a car to go to one event a year. Truly
Yeah.
is.
Hey everyone, this is Kilgore. I'm cutting in here because Jager and I got to yapping so long that we ended up making like a 2-hour episode. And so instead of having you guys listening to that entire episode, we've actually decided to split this up into a part 1 and a part 2. So you guys just wrapped up part 1 listening to our review of GridLife at Lime Rock Park and Global Time Attack at the Ridge. Be sure and check out part 2. It is out as well. So that is where we will preview all of World Time Attack Challenge, the cars that we're excited to see. We also make some predictions. So check that out. See if those come true. Hope you guys are enjoying the episodes. Be coming back for more. See you guys later.